Hello, everybody. First of all, thank you very much for having me. My name is Sam. My pronouns are they, she, and today I'm going to talk about gender representation, and specifically about the overrepresentation of cisgender men in esports research. I've done this research with Karina, which unfortunately is not here, and with Laura, which is, but I'm going to be the one with the duty of talking about it. So I'll start with telling you the objective of this perspective piece. The idea was to explore the balance in gender diversity of the participants in empirical esports research. And the idea, this being a perspective piece, was to inform the reader, first of all, about the gender representation differences, because not everybody might be aware that actually there are differences. The second one is the importance of having an inclusive recruitment strategy. And the third point was to basically give some best practice and future direction, some suggestions for everybody, specifically to researchers. Why did we do that? Well, the first thing is that if you read papers about esports, you'll notice that almost every article included mostly men, and most likely cisgender, even though it's often not specified, it's probably cisgender men. Gender representation and gender differences are important. For whoever studies this topic, obviously, you will know that there are differences, and those differences must be acknowledged. And this is not currently being done. But esports being a new field, we have the chance to actually start in the right way, instead of having to catch up like other fields are doing. And the third point is that obviously we care. Well, I'm transgender, so obviously I care, but Laura is a woman. So we all care about the representation of our own genders. Why is this important? Well, the main reason is quite simple. The results are not transferable most of the time. If you study something on a cisgender man, it doesn't mean that it's applicable to a cisgender woman or to a transgender person, non-binary, binary, it doesn't really matter. Every gender can be different based on your field. It's one of your duties as a researcher is to know how sex and gender will affect your results. And do I need, oh, sorry, I'm clicking. And do I need to take care of this concept? So let's have a look at the methods and the results. The method is going to be quite short. So we took the Esports Research Network database, I think, roughly 1 year ago, and the amount of papers was a little bit over 1,000. Obviously, we selected the English articles, original articles, and we had to remove a few ones where there were no participants, or a few of them were unretrievable in any way, and there were a few without any details about sex and gender, so obviously we had to remove those, and at the end we were left with 120 articles. So obviously we know this is a limitation. We could have used the starting numbers, a much higher starting number, but I mean, this was a choice. This is just a perspective piece. So we had 120 articles in total. About the results, we will have a look at two different points. The first one related to the article data, the second one about the participants. From what you can see from this table, obviously, the total article that had both cisgender men and women is actually not that low. It's roughly 54%, which I just say that we believe there is an overrepresentation of cisgender men, but then you look at this number and you might think, well, it's not that bad. Yeah, that's true, but until you see the second slide. When we see the second slide, it will be clear that there is actually a major difference. And the main reason is, if a paper includes both men and women, but you have 1,000 men and 2 women, it's not really representing both genders. It's just trying to have more numbers, but without actually having a real purpose behind it. But then if you look at the papers that only included either cisgender men or cisgender women, it's 20 to 2, so it's 10 times higher. Now, I appreciate those are small numbers, so obviously we need more time to see potentially some change, but it's still showing us that only 2 papers out of 120 only included cisgender women. Cisgender men, women, and transgender people, and by transgender, just for the sake of this presentation, every paper that said other, non-binary, or transgender are all included into transgender as an umbrella term. We had 14 papers, but the discussion is similar to the first point. How many people were actually transgender in every study? 1, maybe 2, sometimes 3. So very, very small numbers. Transgender only 0%. And then we have actually a very big number, almost 16%, 19 studies with incomplete sex and gender details. What does that mean? It means that the researcher only specified a portion of the sample. For example, I have 100 participants, 37 were men. Okay, fantastic. What about the others? we don't know. And obviously, yes, we can all understand that. They assume that sex and gender are binaries. So it's easy. If I have 37 men, obviously cisgender men, the other 63 must be cisgender women. But we are academics, we are researchers. We should know that sex is not even a binary. So even without talking about gender, whether you believe it or not, sex is not a binary. So this assumption is wrong by default. And it's quite disheartening that researchers would just exclude a portion of the population just to save a few words on the word count. So they need to do better. And obviously, sex is not binary, and gender is even less binary. So it was basically not possible to know what the sample was, the details of the demographics in 16% of the papers that we analyzed, which is quite high. It's quite a lot. Now let's look at the participant data. In total, there were roughly 86,000 participants in the 120 papers we have seen, and 81% were cisgender men, 16% were cisgender women, so it's a 5-to-1 ratio, which was kind of expected. And then 94%, which is 0.1%, were transgender. So if now we look back at this, yeah, fantastic, 54% of papers had both men and women, and roughly 12% almost transgender. Yes, but the transgender people were like 94 in total. So this is not providing me enough information because those 94 were split in 14 papers. So the amount of transgender persons in every paper that were analyzed in any possible way, they were not actually that relevant. And again, we have over 2,000 people that we actually don't know the sex or the gender of the participant. So there is a lot to talk about over there, and we'll do it in a few slides. But yeah, those are the numbers that we find out during our literature review. So now I'm going to discuss a few points in a few different related areas. The first one is obviously gender disparity. As we have seen from the numbers, this is problematic, not just for women, which among the underrepresented genders are still the best one, if you want, aside from cisgender men. There is all the category of transgender people, whether they're binary or not, they're being completely excluded from any analysis. And yes, I understand the percentage of transgender people in the general population or in the gaming population are not the same as cisgender. That doesn't mean that they should be excluded. Yeah, you don't need to focus only on them. Absolutely, nobody's saying that, but you should still include them. So sex and gender disparity is problematic. The second point is a repetition, of course, because that needs to be very much ingrained in our brains. Results obtained from participants of a specific gender are not always applicable to other genders. We need to remember that. My background is sports science, and this is quite a hot topic. It has been in the last decade or so. A lot of people are starting to be like, well, if I am a woman, why am I training with methods that have been discovered and studied only on cisgender men? Does it work in the same way? There are physiological differences. My hormonal profile is different. Why am I using the same methodologies? And that's actually a fair point. Some researchers are working on them, including me, but we need much more. Because at the end of the day, this assumption that the results are transferable can lead to inappropriate applications. So this is quite important for us as academics because we need to inform the industry so that they can make the right choices even if they don't understand the topic necessarily. It's our duty to understand it, it's our duty to explain it to the industry and to make sure that it works for everybody. And then we have to talk about the participant details and the language that is being used. Most of the time, if not every time, was very, very hard to discern between sex and gender details in papers. Mostly because of the unclear terminology. Men, woman, male, female, boy, girls. We have found many ways to describe gender and sex into papers. And I appreciate that until a few decades ago, it might have not been clear, but we very much know that if you talk about gender, you should use man and woman. If you talk about sex assigned at birth, you should use male and female. You shouldn't really use boy and girl in a paper, probably, but it was used. I found a paper that actually used all of these in the same paper, which makes it quite difficult to know, are we talking about gender? Are we talking about sex? Like, what are we talking about? And yes, we can safely assume that we're talking about cisgender men and women again, but I shouldn't assume. You are a researcher, you should be precise. We teach our students, like we would mark them down if they didn't use the right terminology. So why are we using it? That's a question for everybody that does. And of course, the last point again is incomplete details. We cannot have incomplete details. How am I supposed to read a research if I don't know what's happening inside it? If I miss a step of the methodology, my paper is not going to be published. So why are we accepting incomplete details about the description of our own participant? That shouldn't happen. So it's not just for the researcher, it's also for the editor, the reviewer, and everybody involved in the process. How do these papers get accepted? Even the ethical committee, they should know from the methodology what's going to happen potentially. I appreciate for a lot of people, this is like a new topic, but it has been around for hundreds of years. It's not exactly new, so it's really our duty. And yes, just to talk again about the duty, researcher's duty, those are in no specific order, that's not a ranking. But the first thing, every researcher, you should understand gender. Whether you like the topic or not, if you're working with people, you have to understand gender. It's not optional. You need to understand gender because you need to know if sex and or gender can affect your research. Do I need to adapt my methodology in order to include every sex and gender? Or does it really matter for my article, for my research? That's up to you. That's your duty. In my field, the sports sciences, it does. It does affect it, so I need to take care of it. And there are, like in medicine, for example, the medical field, of course it does. There are many fields. It's really up to you. I cannot provide guidelines for everybody. That's up to you as a researcher to figure it out and know if you have to understand better the topic, but probably you do. Of course, use the proper language and include all the details. Now, we're going into some practical recommendations, mostly about the demographic groups and the recruitment approach. Of course, we need a comprehensive recruitment strategy. The idea that it's difficult to access trans people is obviously a fair point, but at the same time, are you actually trying to recruit them in the right way? How are you trying to get them? Because there are online and offline ways to do that. There are, well, if you use Reddit, there are subreddits like trans gamers, like you can find sexual orientation, you can find gender identity, you can find whatever you want on Reddit, and that's just one of the many platforms that you can use. There are Discord channels. You just have to know, you just have to ask yourself, okay, I need more gender representation, where can I find it? And go for it. And when you do that, whether online or offline, because you can even go to a LGBTQIA+ center in the middle of your city and talk to them and try to recruit people in real, not online. But when you do that, you need to approach with care and consideration. Just because you need representation, they don't owe you their participation. You need to earn it, if you wish, for everybody, not just for trans, obviously. You have to explain the significance and benefits for the community. Are you getting them to participate just because you need more people in your sample size, or are you getting them to participate because there is a purpose for everybody involved? That's your duty. And you need to use the right recruitment material and data collection tools. And I'll explain with a little example. This is one of the first results on Google when you look for guidelines. It's from the California State University, San Marcos. I've never been there. I have nothing with them. I don't even know who they are. This is what they suggest. Gender identity, woman, man, transgender, non-binary, non-conforming, prefer to not respond. Let's play a little very quick game by raise of hands. Who thinks this is correct? Who thinks this is not correct? Okay, a little bit. We have a lot of people that don't have an opinion on that. That's fair enough. So let me tell you, as a transgender people, if this is probably going to be one of the first questions you get when you open a survey, right? Because the demographics are the beginning. I would probably not be willing to continue because I wouldn't feel, this is quite transphobic. Because why are you saying that a woman is a woman only if it's cisgender, but if you are transgender, you need to select two options? Why are we saying that a transgender woman is not a woman and a transgender man are not a man? Yes, I can select both, but why the default is the cisgender? Yes, there is a higher number. That doesn't mean that they deserve more. you can simply change the option that you're using to make it more comfortable for everybody. For example, you just leave women and men and ask a second question, does your gender, does your gender and your sex assigned birth are the same? So they don't need to select transgender, they can just say yes or no later. But I would feel more represented if the transgender word was not there. Also, non-binary, non-conforming, they go under the transgender. So yes, I can select more than one, but again, it feels not necessarily the correct way to do that. And this little example sparkled a conversation about the language that we are using, and specifically about etymology versus reality. This can be a little bit more detailed, like if you understand the topic, it might be a little bit easier. The idea is that the technically correct language is not always the best choice. Now, we are academics. I've just explained for the last 10 minutes to use the right language. Yes, but we need to understand that we need to use the right language when we publish, not necessarily when we approach people. Not everybody has a background, an academic background, or not everybody understands all the nuances of languages. And I'll explain it with an example because it's very simple. Non-binary people are technically transgender because transgender is the umbrella term. Non-binary are, well, you cannot be non-binary or binary, and non-binary is one of the options when you're transgender. However, not every non-binary identifies as transgender. There are no publications about that, so I know it because I'm part of the community. There has been several online questionnaires, and we know that roughly 50% of non-binary people, they do not identify as transgender. We can talk about the why in a different moment. You can ask it later. I'm not delving into that right now. But the point is that if I don't identify as transgender, but you only provided the option to select transgender, I will not be feeling represented in your survey. So technically, you're correct in giving me the transgender option, but I don't identify with that. So maybe I will not do your survey, and you're losing a person. So yes, etymology, fantastic, do that. But also be mindful about what the reality is. Obviously, the consequence, I mean, the worst one could be that they're just not filling your survey. Not a major issue, but again, we already have such a few numbers of transgender people. If you're losing some of them because I don't know how to write a survey, that's probably our duty to make sure it works, right? So what do we do? First of all, ask the right question. I know when you do demographics, you just throw a bunch of questions over there to collect as much data as you can, but do we need to know sex, gender, or both? Are they relevant? Because if you're asking me a question where my sex at birth is not meaningful, most trans people would feel a bit uncomfortable with that because why do you need to know that for this specific research? If you need to know it, explain it to me. It should be your duty to explain what you're doing anyway. So why do you need to know these questions? It's really up to you. You can ask both, you can ask neither, you can ask one of them, depends. Open answers. Let the participants self-identify. Why are you giving closed answers? Just leave it open. Leave it as a text box. Yes, it's more work for us because we need to recategorize them. And I can recategorize them in a way that is based on my need. So if you say you're non-binary, I can put you under the transgender umbrella because I know how it works. But that's my duty as a researcher. If I leave an open box, I give everybody the same chance to self-identify and to provide the best answer for whatever they want. Yes, someone will be funny. They will write random things in the box because it's cool, whatever. But we can still work with that. If I provide closed answer, I might lose potential participation. So that's quite important. And yeah, just Just to conclude, a few key points. Of course, we've seen from the numbers, cisgender men are overrepresented in empirical research in esports. Participant details about the sex assigned at birth and gender are often unclear. The differences between transgender and cisgender must be acknowledged where it's relevant. It's not mandatory, but if it's relevant, they must be. And then, of course, the results obtained from cisgender men might not be applicable to other populations, and therefore we need to do a better job in our recruitment. And that's it. Thank you very much.